He looked across the table and said the words no mother ever wants to hear. And just like that, everything I thought I knew about my family shattered. It happened on a quiet evening. No thunder, no warning, just the soft clink of cutlery and the hum of the oven still cooling down. I had spent the whole afternoon cooking his favorites: roast chicken, buttered potatoes, the kind of meal that used to make him smile when he was a boy. I didn't know that dinner would become the line that divided before and after in my life. My name is Margaret Reed. I'm 61 years old, retired from my little job at the library, and I live in the same house where my son, Daniel, grew up. It's an old white house at the end of Maple Lane, the kind where you can hear the floorboards sigh when the wind blows. I used to think those sounds were the house's way of breathing, alive with the memories we'd built inside it. For years, that house was full of laughter. Daniel was my only child. After his father, Richard, passed away, it was just the two of us. We leaned on each other through everything. Birthdays that felt half empty, quiet dinners, nights when the silence felt too heavy. He was a good boy, the kind who'd kiss me on the cheek before leaving for school, who'd sit with me on the porch and ask about my day, even when he was 16 and pretending not to care. I used to tell people I'd been given one of the kind ones, a son with a heart too soft for this world. Then he met Claire. The first time he mentioned her, his voice carried that warmth that only new love can bring. "Mom," he said, his eyes glowing in that way that makes a mother both proud and afraid. "You'll like her. She's kind. She listens." And when he finally brought her home, I did like her. Or at least I wanted to. She had this easy grace about her, the kind that fills a room without trying. Blonde hair tucked neatly behind her ears, gentle smile, polite words. She brought flowers, and when I told her she didn't have to, she said, "I wanted to. Daniel talks about you all the time." For a moment, I believed we could be family. 3 people connected not just by blood, but by care. But even then, there were small things I didn't see clearly. The way Daniel's laughter changed when she was around. The way she'd answer questions for him. The small silences that began to build between us. Like invisible walls forming slowly, one polite smile at a time. When they got married, I sat in the front pew and watched my boy promise his forever to someone else. It's what every mother prepares herself for, I suppose. Letting go, stepping back. I smiled through the ceremony, held my tears till the photographs were done, and told myself this was what love looked like, giving him to someone who would love him as much as I did. For a while, things were fine. They moved into a small apartment downtown. Daniel called every Sunday, sometimes twice a week. Claire would join in, cheerful and chatty. They'd visit once or twice a month, and every time they did, I'd cook like I used to. Roast chicken, mashed potatoes, carrot cake. It felt like we were balancing 2 worlds, carefully but kindly. Then life got busier. Calls became shorter, visits less frequent. Daniel's voice on the phone sounded tired, distracted. And whenever I asked how things were, he'd say, "Good, Mom, just work." It was always just work. Still, I held on to the little things, the occasional text, the photo of them on vacation, the quick, "Love you, Mom," before hanging up. I told myself he was building a life, and I had to give him space to grow. The first time I felt truly left out was his birthday. He had always spent it with me, Even after getting married, we'd share cake and laughter. But that year, I waited and waited. When the day ended, I told myself maybe he'd been too busy. The next morning, I opened my phone to a picture on social media. Daniel and Claire at a restaurant, smiling with candles on the table. No call, no message. Something inside me tightened, but I didn't say anything. Mothers don't. We learn to swallow the small hurts, the quiet disappointments. A few days later, he called. "Mom, I'm sorry about yesterday. Claire booked dinner. It slipped my mind." I told him it was fine, and in that moment, I think he believed me. But inside, something shifted. For the first time, I felt like a guest in his life. Months went by like that, polite conversations, shallow check-ins, and then one afternoon, he called to say they were coming over for dinner. I remember how my heart lifted. It had been weeks since I'd seen him. I spent all day cleaning, cooking, setting the table just right. I even bought a new candle, lavender and cedarwood, his favorite scent when he was little. When they arrived, everything looked perfect. The tablecloth pressed, the roast golden, the kitchen warm. But the air felt different. Claire smiled, but it didn't reach her eyes. Daniel seemed distracted, his phone lighting up every few minutes. Still, I tried. I talked, asked questions, shared stories. Claire nodded politely. Daniel ate quietly. And somewhere between the salad and the main course, silence grew heavy. "Mom," Daniel said finally, putting his fork down, "Claire and I wanted to talk to you about something." I remember smiling, pretending I wasn't nervous. "Of course, dear. What is it?" He looked at her, then back at me. His hands were clasped, like he was trying to hold something fragile. "It's just, we've been thinking of moving." "Moving?" I repeated. "Where to?" He hesitated. "To Seattle. Claire got a job offer there." I tried to stay calm. "That's wonderful, sweetheart, but that's so far." He nodded. "Yeah, but it's a good opportunity. We'll probably leave in a few weeks." The room felt smaller suddenly. I could hear the tick of the clock behind me, the hum of the fridge, the faint creak of the chair when I shifted. I forced a smile. "I'm happy for you both." But Claire's expression softened, almost guilty. "Margaret," she said gently, "we thought it might be best if you didn't worry about us so much once we move. You have your own life, and we'll have ours." It sounded harmless, but to a mother, those words echo. You have your own life. I felt the sting behind my eyes, but blinked it away. "Of course," I said quietly. "I understand." We finished dinner in silence. After they left that night, I sat at the table long after the dishes were done. Their plates were empty, but the air still held their voices. Faint, distant, fading. I looked at the candle, still burning low, and thought about how quickly warmth turns to smoke. That was the night everything began to change. Not loudly, not with anger, just with a quiet understanding that the child you raised no longer needs your home the way he once did. That night, I didn't sleep much after that. I kept hearing Daniel's voice, soft, careful, trying not to hurt me, and Claire's words, meant kindly, but landing like stones. You have your own life. What she didn't know was that he was my life. Over the following days, I went through the motions. Made coffee, watered the plants, watched the same morning shows, but everything felt muted. The house, once a haven of memories, seemed too large. Every creak, every echo reminded me that love can't always stay close. Still, I told myself this was part of life. Children grow, they build homes of their own. I had to be strong for him. But strength, I learned, isn't about not crying. It's about letting tears fall quietly, knowing no one will see them, and still setting the table again the next day. I didn't hear from them for a while after that dinner. Not for days, then weeks. And before I realized it, months had passed since the last time Daniel had walked through my front door. At first, I told myself he was busy. New city plans, new job for Claire, maybe packing up. But when silence stretches long enough, even excuses start to sound hollow. I would catch myself checking my phone every few minutes. Sometimes I'd type a message. How are you both doing? Then erase it before sending. Because when a mother starts to feel like she's intruding, she learns to speak less. The morning they finally called, it was a Sunday. I was in the garden, trimming the roses, when my phone rang. Daniel's name flashed on the screen, and for the first time in weeks, my heart leapt. Daniel! Oh, sweetheart, I was just thinking about you. His voice sounded cheerful, maybe too cheerful. Hey, Mom. Sorry, it's been crazy lately. I meant to call. I smiled, brushing the dirt from my gloves. I figured, you must be busy with the move. Actually, yeah, we're almost packed. We'll be leaving next weekend. My hand froze midair. That soon? Yeah, Claire's job starts the following Monday. I swallowed. Will you come by before you go? He hesitated, and in that pause, my heart already knew the answer. I don't think we'll have time, Mom, but we'll video call you once we're settled, okay? When the call ended, I stood there in the garden, surrounded by sunlight and blooming flowers, yet I felt utterly hollow inside. The roses looked bright and alive, but I couldn't feel their beauty. It was like I was watching my life fade quietly, petal by petal. That night, I couldn't eat. I sat by the window, looking at the empty driveway where Daniel's car used to be, and whispered a prayer I'd never said out loud before. Please let him miss me. The following week, I received a small message on my phone. We've reached Seattle. Everything's good. Love you, Mom. No call, no voice, just words on a screen. I read it over and over again as if more meaning would appear if I stared long enough. For days after that, I tried to keep myself busy. I joined a small reading club, started baking again. I told myself I was adjusting. But the truth, I was waiting. Waiting for his next call. Waiting for a sign that distance hadn't erased love. Then one evening, the phone rang again. It was Daniel, finally. I could hear Claire's laughter faintly in the background. Mom, how are you? I'm fine, sweetheart. How's Seattle treating you? It's nice, rainy. Claire loves it here. I'm glad. And you? Are you happy? He paused. Yeah, I am. But his voice, it sounded uncertain. Like happiness was something he was trying to convince himself of. We talked for a few minutes, but halfway through, Claire called out from behind him, something about dinner reservations. And just like that, the conversation ended. I'll call you soon, Mom. But he didn't. Weeks turned into months again. The silence this time was heavier,
colder. When his birthday came around, I mailed him a handmade scarf wrapped neatly with a note that said, "For the cold Seattle nights. Love, Mom." I waited for a reply.
Nothing. Then, 3 weeks later, a short text. "Thanks, Mom. Got the package." No heart, no call, no warmth. Just words. That was when I knew something deeper was wrong. One evening, I decided to call him myself. When he answered, his voice was low, tired. "Daniel, is everything all right?" "Yeah," he sighed. "Just work stuff, nothing big." I hesitated. "You don't sound like yourself, honey." There was a long silence. And then he said, quietly, "Mom, can I ask you something?" "Of course." "Did you ever feel like you were losing yourself after Dad died?" The question caught me off guard. "Yes," I whispered. "Every day for a while. Why do you ask?" He exhaled. "Sometimes I feel like that now. Like I don't know who I am anymore." "Daniel." But before I could say more, I heard Claire's voice again in the background. Her tone was sharp this time. "Daniel, are you still on the phone?" He muttered something, then said softly, "I'll call you later, Mom." The line went dead. That night, I couldn't sleep again. His voice, the weariness in it, wouldn't leave my mind. I knew that tone. It was the same one I had carried after losing his father. So, the next morning, I wrote him a letter. Not an email, not a text. A real letter, with ink, folded carefully, sealed with care. It said, "My dearest Daniel, I know life can be confusing sometimes, but remember who you are. The boy who used to fix broken bird nests, the young man who stayed up helping me with groceries after work, the one who never let kindness leave his hands. No job, no city, no person should take that away from you, and no distance can take you away from me. Love always, Mom." When he arrived, he looked thinner, like the world had been too heavy on him. I opened the door and hugged him tight. He didn't say anything for a while, just stood there, his face buried in my shoulder. Inside, we sat down to eat, but he barely touched the food. He kept staring at his plate. "Daniel," I said gently, "what happened?" He sighed, rubbing his face. "Mom, she says I've changed, that I'm not the man she married, but I feel like she's the one changing me." Tears welled up in my eyes. "Sweetheart." He shook his head. "I don't even know who I'm supposed to be anymore." For the first time in years, he let his guard down. He talked for hours that night about how Claire had become distant, controlling, dismissive, how she mocked his choices, how every small disagreement turned into blame. I listened, every word, and at the end, I said quietly, "Sometimes, Daniel, love isn't about staying. It's about knowing when to stop breaking for someone else." He looked up, eyes tired but soft. "I just wanted someone to say that, Mom." He stayed the weekend. We talked, cooked, even laughed a little. It felt like old times again, just me and my boy. But when he left, I knew something deeper was about to unfold. That visit was not an ending. It was the beginning of everything that would come crashing down later. Because when love starts breaking quietly, it doesn't stay quiet for long. The house felt too quiet after Daniel left that weekend. I tried to go back to my routine, watering the plants, folding laundry, keeping busy. But everything reminded me of him. The empty chair at the breakfast table, the echo of his laughter in the hall, even the smell of the coffee he used to make. It was like my home had inhaled his presence and couldn't exhale. Days passed before I heard from him again. When he finally called, his voice was tired, heavier than before. "Mom, Claire wants to talk to you." I froze. Her? After all these months of silence? After all the distance? She wanted to talk? "Of course," I said softly. "Put her on." There was a pause. Then her voice came through. Polite, distant, smooth. "Hi, Mary." I smiled faintly. "Hello, Claire. How are you, dear?" "I'm fine," she said, but her tone was tight. "Daniel told me you two talked a lot last weekend." "Yes," I replied gently. "He needed someone to listen." She was silent for a moment. Then she said something that felt like a small crack forming in the air. "I just hope you didn't tell him to leave me." My breath caught. "Claire, I would never—" She interrupted, her voice sharper now. "I know how mothers can be. You've never really liked me, have you?" Her words hit me harder than I expected. It wasn't anger that filled me. It was a quiet ache. "Claire," I said softly, "you're his wife. I've always respected that." But she didn't respond. The line went silent, and after a few seconds, she hung up. I stood there, holding the phone to my ear, long after the call had ended. The sound of that click, that final disconnect, echoed louder than any argument could. The next few weeks passed in silence again. Then, one afternoon, Daniel called out of nowhere. "Mom, can we come over for dinner this weekend?" My heart skipped. "Of course! I'll make roast chicken, your favorite." He hesitated. "Claire wants to come too." I smiled, though part of me felt nervous. "That's wonderful, Daniel. I'd love that." When the call ended, I stood still for a long time, trying to steady my breathing. Something about the way he said Claire wants to come too felt less like a visit and more like a test. I spent the next 2 days preparing. I cleaned every corner of the house, polished the old silverware, and even set out the good dishes I hadn't used in years. I wanted the evening to be warm, peaceful, maybe a chance to mend what had quietly broken. On Saturday evening, the doorbell rang. When I opened the door, Daniel stood there, smiling faintly. Behind him, Claire, beautiful, poised, her expression unreadable. "Come in, both of you," I said warmly. Claire stepped inside slowly, looking around the house like she was walking through a museum. She smiled politely. "It looks the same." "It hasn't changed much." "Some things shouldn't." She didn't answer. Dinner was quiet at first. Too quiet. The only sounds were the clinking of cutlery and the soft ticking of the old wall clock. "So," I said, trying to break the silence, "how's Seattle treating you both?" Daniel smiled faintly. "It's good. Busy. Claire's been working a lot." Claire nodded. "Yes, I just got promoted." "That's wonderful," I said sincerely. "You must be proud."
She smiled, but it didn't reach her eyes. I am, though Daniel's been adjusting. The way she said adjusting felt like a needle. Daniel shifted uncomfortably in his chair. Claire, he said softly, can we not? She cut him off, her tone still calm but edged. I'm just saying it's been different. We both had to make sacrifices. I looked down at my plate, pretending to fix my napkin, but my hands were trembling. I could feel the storm coming, quiet but inevitable. After a few more minutes of silence, Claire spoke again. Mary, I've been meaning to ask, did you tell Daniel to take that job offer back home? I blinked, startled. What job offer? She raised an eyebrow. He didn't tell you? He got an offer here, in town, but he turned it down. I turned to Daniel, my heart tightening. You didn't mention that, sweetheart. He sighed. Because it doesn't matter, Mom. Claire laughed, softly, but it cut deep. Does it matter? Daniel, it was a great job, but you said you didn't want to move back because you didn't want your mother to get too attached again. The air froze. I looked at Daniel, my throat suddenly dry. He stared at his plate, silent. Is that true? I whispered. He opened his mouth, but no words came out. And in that silence, I understood everything. It wasn't Claire's cruelty that hurt me most. It was Daniel's silence. Because silence from someone you love can wound deeper than words ever could. I smiled faintly, trying to hold myself together. I see. Well, I wouldn't want to make anyone uncomfortable. Daniel looked up then, guilt all over his face. Mom! But Claire interrupted, her voice calm, composed. I just think boundaries are healthy, don't you? I looked at her for a long moment. She was young, proud, maybe even a little scared, though she'd never admit it. And in that instant, I realized she wasn't my enemy. She was a woman trying to hold on to something that was slipping away, even if it meant pushing me out to do it. Still, the words stung. I stood up slowly, gathered the dishes, and said quietly, "Let me get dessert." In the kitchen, I held on to the counter, trying not to cry. The smell of roast chicken still lingered in the air, and the hum of their voices drifted faintly from the dining room. I thought about all the years I had raised Daniel, all the nights I stayed up when he was sick, all the times I clapped for him at school plays, all the times I told him he could be anything. And now, I was the one he was learning to live without.
I closed my eyes, took a deep breath, and carried the dessert back to the table. When I placed it down, Claire smiled. That smells lovely. Thank you, I whispered. After dinner, they got ready to leave. Daniel hugged me, his arms tight. I'm sorry, Mom, he murmured. I smiled through my tears. It's all right, sweetheart. Go live your life. That's what I always wanted for you. Claire said a polite goodbye, and as they walked out the door, I caught Daniel's eyes one last time. He looked back, as if wanting to say something more, but then turned away. The sound of the car starting outside felt like the sound of a door closing inside me. That night, I sat by the window again, watching the rain slide down the glass. The house was silent except for the soft ticking of that same clock. I whispered into the quiet, I hope you're happy, my son, even if it's without me. And that was the night everything truly changed, because the next morning, Daniel showed up at my door again, alone, soaked from the rain, eyes red, trembling. "Mom," he said, his voice breaking, "we had a fight. I couldn't stay there." I opened the door wide. "Come inside, Daniel." He stepped inside, dripping water on the floor. "I shouldn't have let her talk to you like that. I should have defended you." I reached out and touched his cheek. "You're here now. That's all that matters." He broke down then, right there in my arms, crying like the little boy I once rocked to sleep. And I held him, just like I used to. Because no matter how old your child becomes, a mother never forgets how to comfort them. Daniel stayed that night. He didn't talk much at first, just sat by the fire with a blanket wrapped around his shoulders. The room smelled faintly of rain and smoke. Outside, the wind whispered against the windows like it was afraid to interrupt. I brought him a cup of tea, the same way I used to when he was little. He smiled weakly. "You still make it the same way." I said some things shouldn't change. For a long while, we sat in silence, listening to the rain. And then finally, he spoke. "Mom, she said I needed to choose between being a husband and being your son." I froze. The words hurt, but I didn't react. I just let him talk. "She said I'm tired of feeling like she's second in my life." I nodded slowly. "And do you think she's wrong?" He hesitated, caught between guilt and truth. "I don't know anymore." That night, Daniel slept in his old room. When I passed by, I saw him lying there, the same boy who once refused to sleep without his nightlight, now a man carrying the weight of two worlds on his shoulders. I whispered to myself, "God, give him peace, even if it means I have to let him go again." The next morning, I made breakfast like I used to. Pancakes, scrambled eggs, orange juice. He smiled when he saw the table. "You really don't change, do you?" I laughed quietly. "If I do, I might lose myself completely." We ate in gentle silence. Then he looked up and said, "Mom, I need to make things right with her." I nodded. "Then go do that, son. Don't let pride build walls where love can build bridges." He stood, hugged me tight, and whispered, "Thank you for not hating her." I smiled. "She's the woman you chose. That's enough for me." For days, I didn't hear from him. I prayed for them both every night, not for things to be perfect, just for understanding to find its way between them. Then one evening, there was a knock on my door. When I opened it, both Daniel and Claire were standing there. My heart skipped. "Hi, Mary," Claire said quietly. "Come in," I whispered. They stepped inside. The air was still, thick with things unsaid. Daniel looked tired but calmer. Claire, she looked nervous. After a few moments, she said, "I owe you an apology." I looked at her gently. "You don't owe me anything, dear." "I do," she insisted, her voice trembling slightly. "I was unfair to you. I thought you were trying to pull him away from me. But I was wrong. You were just being his mother." Her eyes filled with tears. And for the first time since I'd met her, I saw the woman behind the pride. "I was so afraid of losing him," she said softly. "But I realize now I never had to compete with you. You're part of who he is." I felt a lump in my throat. I reached out, took her hand, and said quietly,
You don't owe me anything, dear. I do, she insisted, her voice trembling slightly. I was unfair to you. I thought you were trying to pull him away from me. But I was wrong. You were just being his mother. Her eyes filled with tears, and for the first time since I'd met her, I saw the woman behind the pride. I was so afraid of losing him, she said softly. But I realize now I never had to compete with you. You're part of who he is. I felt a lump in my throat. I reached out, took her hand, and said quietly, "You don't lose love by sharing it, Claire. You just make more room for it to live." She nodded, tears rolling down her cheeks. Daniel placed his arm around her, his voice thick with emotion. "She means that, Claire. She always has." That night, I cooked dinner again. Roast chicken, just like before. But this time, the silence around the table was peaceful, not painful. There were small laughs, small glances, small beginnings. At one point, Claire smiled and said, "This tastes even better than last time." I laughed softly. Maybe because we're not seasoning it with tension tonight. Daniel chuckled. "Mom." And for the first time in what felt like years, the house felt warm again. Later, as they got ready to leave, Claire hugged me, really hugged me for the first time. "Thank you," she whispered, "for not giving up on us." I held her tight. "Thank you for coming back." When they drove away that night, I didn't feel empty like before. I felt complete. Because sometimes reconciliation isn't loud. It's quiet, like the steady rhythm of a heart learning to trust again. The next few months were gentle. They called often, visited when they could. Claire started sending me pictures of their new apartment, plants on the windowsill, Daniel cooking dinner. They looked happy. And I realized something. Healing isn't about fixing what's broken. It's about loving what remains. One afternoon, I received a small envelope in the mail. It was from Daniel and Claire. Inside was a picture. The three of us from that last dinner, smiling. And behind it, a note in Daniel's handwriting. "You were right, Mom. One dinner changed everything between us because it showed us what love really means." Tears filled my eyes as I placed the photo on the mantelpiece, right next to one of his father. The two pictures, one old, one new, side by side, like life had come full circle. That evening, I sat by the window again. The sky was painted in soft shades of gold and blue. I thought about how love isn't measured in distance or words. It's measured in the quiet moments when forgiveness wins over pride. And as the light faded, I whispered to myself, "I forgive, I understand, and I am at peace." Because sometimes the greatest act of love a mother can give is to let her child go and still keep the door open. Love tested by distance doesn't have to end in loss. Sometimes the space between hearts is where forgiveness learns to breathe.
Did this story touch your heart? Tell me in the comments. I'd love to know where you're listening from. If you enjoyed this story, you can support me by sending a super thanks. It truly helps me keep creating more heartfelt stories for you. Thank you from the bottom of my heart for your kindness and love. On your screen now, you'll find 2 more true life stories I think you'll really enjoy. There's so much more waiting for you on my channel, so don't forget to subscribe before you go. Until next time, with love, warmth, and respect, Mary.